My gut feel as a journalist tells me that this particular case is a lot bigger than we realize, and the investigators are expanding the scope of their investigation every passing day. And that's what merits us now to revisit the story one more time. And this will be part 3 of the Ram Mandir donation embezzlement case. We have part 1 and part 2 already, and you can go take a look at that. But in part 3, we're going to talk about the fact that the investigators are now asking more uncomfortable questions or bigger questions. Like, one, how did so much money allegedly disappear from one of the most protected and most important temples in the country? Number 2, could something like this actually have happened over the course of months and no one higher up noticed? And if someone did notice, who was that someone and why did they look the other way? So we're going to look at a lot of questions that are now being raised. I'm going to put together a lot of the new information that's come in the last couple of days since our last video in this part 3 edition of the Ram Mandir donation embezzlement case. Before we get started, a reminder to like, share, subscribe, share this video with someone you think will find this information useful. And of course, for our membership, which you can sign up for on the homepage of this YouTube, our YouTube page, if you do sign up every day, you will get access to one audio news bulletin, which is all of the important news that's happened around the world and in our country in the least triggering way possible. So you can spend 10 minutes, find out what's happened, and then move on with your life without being traumatized by any of it. Okay, let's take a look at what's happening with this case right now. According to investigators, they're saying, and this is a really big one, they're saying the period in which the largest amount of money was siphoned off was during the Mahakumbh. I'm going to pop up a couple of visuals of the Mahakumbh on the screen just to jog your memory so you know what I'm talking about. This is a significant revelation because the Mahakumbh was precisely the time when temple donations shot through the roof because of the sheer number of people who were visiting for the Mahakumbh. Millions of pilgrims traveled to Prayagraj for the Mahakumbh, also visited Ayodhya at the same time. As a result, there was an unprecedented increase in the number of offerings being made at the Ram Mandir. According to police sources quoted by Deccan Herald, investigators now believe that this enormous surge in donations created exactly the kind of conditions the accused were looking to exploit. According to the sources, the embezzlement was already taking place at this time for several months, but investigators have reason to believe that the maximum amount of money disappeared during that Mahakumbh period. And if we think about what that means, it means that more donations were flowing into the temple and more money was actually being embezzled out. It was becoming more difficult to monitor every bundle of cash that was coming in. Police sources believe that the accused allegedly used this period of extraordinary volume to siphon off donations while remaining hidden inside the operation. And this is one of the central theories that the investigators are now pursuing. They need to establish exactly how in that counting process, specifically in those few weeks, how the process actually functioned, who was supervising, who was accessing, and whether procedures changed because of the numbers of the people who were visiting. A quick, update for you as to who has been arrested. 8 people I had already told you about. Those remain the 8 people who've been arrested. Avinash Shukla, Tinu Yadav, Anukalp Mishra, Love Kush Mishra, Karnesh Pandey, Manish Yadav, Ramkrishna Mishra, and Subhash Srivastav. Now, in the previous video, I've given you a blow-by-blow who these people are and what they've been accused of. But 2 people in this list have become very important to the investigators. Lavkush Mishra and Anukalp Mishra, according to police, they allegedly accumulated immovable assets during this period that's currently under investigation. Investigators are now examining whether these assets were purchased with money used from temple donations. Police sources have indicated that they might also now speak to the income tax department and other investigative sources, agencies might be brought in. So I would assume ED, because this is what they do, the enforcement directorate, the income tax department, to follow the money trail of where this has gone. According to the Times of India, quoting police sources, reports say that investigators have questioned Avinash Shukla inside the district jail. After getting permission from the court, they confronted him about the CCTV visuals and witness statements and evidence collected. And allegedly, during that interrogation, they apparently painted a picture of how this operation was being planned. According to police sources, investigators believe that the members of the racket spent a considerable amount of time studying the counting center, where the CCTV cameras were positioned, the entry and the exit points, the movement of employees, the overall layout of the facility. And so this was not an opportunistic theft where basically you saw some money on the table, you put it in your pocket because it tempted you in that moment. This was a conspiracy of a certain number of people who sat together and figured out how to do a heist. Okay. So one of the ways they did it, this is again Times of India quoting police sources, apparently the money was first hidden inside the washrooms of the temple premises. According to investigators, cash was taken out of the donations made by devotees, moved to the temple washrooms, where it was then moved out in small quantities over an extended period of time so as to not get a lot of attention. So nobody noticed a sudden disappearance of large amounts of cash, because rather than attempting to move large amounts of cash at one point, they were moving smaller and smaller amounts through the washrooms. Investigators believe this would have allowed the accused to avoid attracting attention during security pat-downs. Now, the police are trying to verify every step of how that money disappeared, but they're also trying to figure out what exactly happened. So they're examining how the money was removed from the counting process, where it was hidden, who removed it, what was the suspicious activity someone would have seen and turned the other way. According to police sources, investigators are expected to question sanitation workers, maintenance staff, people who were cleaning the washrooms, for example. And the purpose is straightforward. Did you notice a hidden packet? Did you notice unusual visits? Was somebody coming in multiple times? Did you see suspicious behavior? And they say that every allegation will be tested on 3 forms of evidence, which is CCTV, forensic evidence, and witness testimony. There was a mystery, of course, which I told you in the previous video about the donation keys. Now, again, according to police sources being quoted, Avinash Shukla, the second person in that list I told you about, allegedly told the investigators that there were 2 keys to the donation room. One of it was with Tinu Yadav. And this is the interesting thing. Tinu Yadav had no official role in counting. He was not an employee employed in the counting process. He was the driver of one of the trustees, and that is something that will raise a lot of eyebrows. The second key, according to investigators, was held by the officials of State Bank of India, and the revelation will now actually cause the police to question Tinu Yadav, who is in jail. Investigators want to determine whether the possession of that key allowed unauthorized access to the counting room. Now, police are also going to follow the money, and this I find fascinating. Investigators are going to try and figure out where the money was spent, because cash doesn't vanish, right? So either it was spent, or it was deposited somewhere, or it was invested somewhere, converted to property, or was hidden. Can only apparently go into these 5 things. So investigators are looking through now land records, property registrations, bank accounts, financial documents, other assets linked to the accused and their family members. Police sources say investigators suspect at least a part of the embezzlement money would have been invested into land or hotels or residential property. Every property purchase is being examined closely alongside the declared income of that individual to see if the 2 things are actually matching, because they'll ask, if this person has bought property here, does his declared salary / money that they have in their account, which they pay taxes on, actually show that they can afford this, or is it disproportionate asset? Now, this is what they have recovered so far. The investigation has shown substantial recoveries. Like I told you last time, about 80 lakh rupee in cash, plus $1,000 gold jewelry and silver jewelry. And the largest recovery was made from Avinash Shukla, who had 20.3 lakh in cash, a little over $1,000, 2 gold chains, 1 gold ring, and a silver-colored metal object. And the smaller amounts of money, close to 15 lakh or so, from Karunesh Pandey and the rest of them. Small amounts of money. Tinu Yadav said, the police said they already 1 lakh rupees from him. But they continue to search. They've carried out searches in the residence of Lavkush Mishra and Anukalp Mishra. And investigators say they're simultaneously pursuing several different lines of inquiry. So they're doing custodial interrogation, obviously, forensic examination, financial scrutiny, analysis of banking records, property verification, and so on. So to just give you an idea how complex this investigation is, the SIT has been given more time by the government of Uttar Pradesh, now extended until the 15th of July, to finish their investigation so that they can trace the money as well and figure out where that money went. So just gives us an idea of how complex the investigation actually is. There are a couple of new mysteries that have emerged in this investigation. According to the Telegraph, investigators are now looking at an organization called Ram Rajya Prashasan. Now, according to the police, the 8 arrested individuals allegedly founded this organization together, which suggests that there's something there to look at. The organization, investigators say, had installed steel collection boxes across the city of Ayodhya carrying the words Ram Rajya Kosh. And in one report, they contained QR codes to help people make digital payments. And investigators are now examining the purpose of these collection boxes, who authorized them, where did the money go, who controlled this QR code, and what the final bank account was. Interestingly, when the arrests started to happen on the 25th of June, the boxes disappeared magically. Only one box remained, and it was inside the Sham Sadhnalaya Yoga Kendra. So, in a yoga school, there was one box, and Avinash Shukla apparently had been staying at that yoga school. Investigators are now examining whether the collection boxes formed a wider financial operation. They spoke to the yoga center, obviously, and the Telegraph said that they spoke to one of the staff members. One employee said Avinash Shukla initially just rented a room, and then his older brother Abhishek also came. He brought the box in early June and kept it in the hall. He put a lock on it. We don't have anything to do with him or the box. We asked him to vacate the premises on the 6th of June when we got to know about his involvement in stealing money from the Ram temple. Another staff member, yoga instructor Seema Tiwari, described what was happening. When she said, we called Abhishek about the raid, he said Avinash is a drug addict and the narcotics department officers are interrogating them. So obviously these two individuals, these two brothers have to be looked into. There was also a house that attracted attention. According to the Telegraph, police sources say investigators recovered more than 25 lakh rupees from Avinash Shukla's room at the yoga center. Investigators raided his ancestral home in Pratapgarh as well. According to one senior police officer, they found that a new home was under construction right next to the mud house in which his parents lived. They are now trying to figure out who funded that construction and where the money actually came from. Now, obviously, there's not been much in terms of official response that's come from the cops. Ayodhya Circle Officer Ashutosh Tripathi, who has been appointed the inquiry officer in the case, confirmed that the investigation is ongoing, but on record has not been very forthcoming in terms of details. But all of the details I'm telling you right now being quoted by the press from sources inside the police. A couple of other things that have emerged that are very interesting. Sainik Security Services was one of the first organizations to publicly respond. This was a private agency that recruits people that are deployed in the Ram Temple cash handling unit. After questions began to emerge, the company denied any involvement in the embezzlement, and they said they have never handled donations. They've never supervised counting. It is decided and has never decided what work its employees will do after they are hired. According to the director of the company, one Gaurav Singh, he told India Today apparently, our company has nothing to do with the donation theft. We recruited 22 people, sent them to the SBI branch. What work the bank has given them, we don't know. The company says SBI chose every single employee, and the chief manager of SBI, he said, sent us a list of names and biodata of 22 people. Those are the people that we supplied to them. We've only given housekeeping staff to do housekeeping duties, but we don't tell them what to do when they get there. This contributes an earlier report. According to PTI, sources within that SBI bank actually said that officials had begun suspecting irregularities and they wanted to remove the workers 3 months ago. But apparently they said the Sri Ram Janmabhoomi Tirtha Kshetra Trust did not permit them to make those changes. This is what was said to PTI. And the allegation has become one of the most closely watched aspects of that investigation. So on one hand, you have the security company saying, we did not, we have nothing to do with who was hired, we've just facilitated. But on the other hand, SBI is saying we wanted to change people, we were not allowed to change. Now, in the previous story, I told you about Champat Rai, who was a trustee, one of the most recognized faces of the Ram Janmabhoomi movement from the beginning till now. In fact, Tinu Yadav, who had keys to the counting room, was his personal driver. Champat Rai resigned when all of this broke out, and there's been really no individual more closely associated with the controversy than Champat Rai. For years, he was closely associated with the Ram Janmabhoomi Tirtha Kshetra Trust. He played a central role in communicating with the public during the construction of the Ram Mandir. Now, according to the New Indian Express, quoting PTI, Champat Rai has told close associates that he is being betrayed by the people he trusted. He reportedly said, my service in Ayodhya is complete. He did not want to continue carrying what he described stigma. And these comments come shortly after he stepped down as the Trust General Secretary. Although he's not been accused of personally stealing anything, he has offered his resignation right now out of moral responsibility. Although there have been some demands that he be questioned as well, although we don't know on record if he has been questioned so far. The trust also now on the 6th of July faces a crucial meeting where they will discuss the resignations that have been put in by their trustees Anil Mishra and Champat Rai, and also the recommendations of the SIT. The most explosive allegations so far also came from Dinesh Yadav. He is the brother of Tinu Yadav. He gave a television interview where he said his brother was being made a scapegoat in order to protect the big fish. Speaking to India Today, Dinesh Yadav has said, "My brother," and I quote, "my brother never had any disputes or criminal cases. He's worked with Champat Rai for 20 years. Now he has been abandoned. The big people are saving themselves while the small people are being framed," end quote. So, who are the big people now? For Tinu Yadav, is Champat Rai the big person? And for Champat Rai, who is this big person that he trusted who has now abandoned him? Dinesh Yadav has also said that investigators only got 1 lakh from Tinu Yadav, which means he's saying they're portraying him as the biggest culprit. But what did he get? He got 1 lakh. He's not someone involved in a 18-20 lakh scam. Tinu is being framed. And these are the things that have raised further questions. Dinesh Yadav has said that he has no lawyer is willing to represent his brother. He's appealed for legal aid, but it has not come yet, and whether or not the request will ultimately be granted remains to be seen. So, there is a general suggestion right now that the investigation is a lot bigger than we can expect, that these 8 people might actually be, forgive my language, small fry in the size of the scam that we're talking about. And there's a suggestion that there are bigger people right now scapegoating these smaller guys, people like drivers and counters and people working in security agencies, and the actual scam goes much, much deeper. And we'll wait for that investigation to come through. But there's another thing that I was looking into when it came in, which is the administration of temples in India. And this has been before this in the South, there was this whole question of should the government be involved in administering temples or should they not be involved in administration of temples? And I did, a little bit of digging to find out how temples are actually managed in India. Apparently, we have 10 lakh Hindu temples across the country. Some of them are small. They're village shrines or they're neighborhood temples or they're family temples, places of worship mostly managed by local communities. Priests or the managing family looks after it. But really the question comes in when we talk about the very large temples, the ones that receive millions of visitors or devotees every year. They own thousands of acres of land. They have jewelry running into the thousands of crores. And the main ones obviously are the Ram Temple in Ayodhya, Varanasi, Haridwar, Tirupati, Madurai, Guruvayur, Sabrimala, Vaishno Devi. These, to name a few, these are not just places of worship. These are institutions. They're public institutions with substantial financial responsibilities. And there's no, interestingly, single model of management across India that applies to all Hindu temples. According to the Indian Express that did a breakdown of how this works, temple administration follows 3 traditional systems in India. Let's take a look at them. One, like I said, is family management. And this is one of the most common systems. These families are known as pujaris or pandas, and the model is that the priest's family conducts the rituals, receives the offering, looks after the temple, retains the management rights. And one of the most interesting examples of this comes from my home state, Karnataka, where the famous Udupi Krishna Mutt, rather than being controlled by one institution, is controlled by 8 monasteries who take turns to run it. And this was a system that was established by the 13th century philosopher Madhavacharya. Each monastery will govern the temple for 2 years. And after 8 monasteries have finished their 2-year cycle, the cycle will begin from the beginning again, which means each monastery gets a turn after 16 years. And this is one of the oldest examples of a rotational religious administration that is still functioning today. Another system, and this is the second system, is the Mahant system. The authority rests with a single spiritual leader, and depending on tradition, the leader may be known as the Mahant or the Matidapati, or unlike family managed temples, a Mahant usually exercises authority over all of the decisions, and succession is decided instead of hereditary family to family. The Mahant is chosen and nominates a successor by the previous Mahant. So a best known example of this is the Gorakhnath Mutt in Gorakhpur, where the current head is Yogi Adityanath, who is also the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, and he was chosen by his predecessor. And that model exists within the traditional Shankaracharya mutts established by Adi Shankaracharya, where the succession follows a spiritual lineage rather than a family inheritance. And then the third system is the Akhada system. Now, you'll remember during the Mahakumbh, where the Akhadas lead the ceremonial procession to the rivers. Today, we have in India 13 recognized Akhadas, and rather than one individual exercising complete authority, the Akhadas function through councils or elected leadership. They appoint the priests, they manage the temple, they control the donations, and they maintain the religious property. And these are our traditional ancient systems that continue in India. But where does the government and the law and order and structure come into all of this? Now, many Indians believe that the government has no role, but that's not true because 160 years ago, the British got involved. So in 1863, the British enacted what was called as the Religious Endowments Act. And this law shifted temple administration to committees created under the act. So the Madras Hindu Religious Endowments Act of 1925 expanded government role in temple endowments. After independence, many states used that law to bring in their own legislations. So, depending on which state you're in, the appointments might be different. The Constitution also under Article 25(2) allows state governments to regulate financial, political, secular activities associated with religious practice. You can't involve yourself in the religious activity, but you can involve yourself in secular administration. So, different states actually administer this differently. In Tamil Nadu, more than 40,000 temples are under state legislation. In Andhra Pradesh, you will know that Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanams, TDT is this called, functions as an independent trust, but the board of trustees and the CEO is appointed by the state government. In Kerala, a good example is the Travancore Devaswam Board of 1950. It was created. It manages more than 1,000 temples, including the Sabrimala temple. In Uttar Pradesh, Kashi Vishwanath temple in 1983, a gold vessel went missing. After that, the Uttar Pradesh government enacted an act which places the board of trustees under a government-appointed CEO. In Jammu and Kashmir, in the Vaishno Devi Shrine, it's administered by a government-appointed board. So there is room here legally and otherwise for the government to get involved and make sure that these boards are being run in a responsible manner. But fundamentally, the question that comes back here is a governance question, because while people approach the Ram Mandir temple with their faith and their offerings, is there a sense of responsibility as to how those offerings are being treated, with what kind of respect and responsibility those offerings are being treated and what they're being used for? Or is it being treated like an, sort of a bottomless pit of cash that people can dip into as and when they please? So there are only two possible answers to what has happened in that donation center. One, people who are just counting guys from the security agency were given such a free hand that they could help themselves to any amount of money, which then just says that there was irresponsible management, in which case the government needs to step in and clean up that management. Or number two, where the counting guys were not given unlimited access. What they were given was a clean chit when the higher-ups told them what to do and looked the other way, in which case then the law and order and the investigators need to find out who those higher-ups were. Because at the end of the day, we can take a look at temple management from different points of view, that should the government get involved, should not the government get involved. But theft is theft from anywhere. And theft is fundamentally a disrespect of property law. In this case, the property belongs to the collective of the people who have given it as donations. Jinhone chadaya tha. It belongs to them. It belongs to their collective faith. And theft here is a disrespect of that collective faith. And so this is of paramount importance that the investigators, I wouldn't say get to the bottom of this, but actually get to the top of this and find out up to where that trail actually ends. So when we're watching this very closely to see what happens in this investigation and what the investigators actually really find, I want to remind you here that all of the information that we're looking at is information that sources have leaked to press. But the real investigation that the SIT already submitted, we've not got access to because it's not been made public. And now new pieces of information we will perhaps only get access to when they are presented before a court. And we'll bring you those details as and when they develop. Leave me a comment in the comment section if you believe that government and law and order needs to get involved in the way these temples are being run, or should they be kept completely hands off?